So, functional threshold power, ramp tests, FTP tests, Zwift, Training Peaks Virtual, the Sufferfest. What's the other one? My Whoosh. All of these platforms. Ruvi. Yeah, there's lots out there now, aren't there? How do you increase your FTP? But
my response to someone asking that question would be, why are you trying to specifically improve your FTP? It is the measure, or the theoretical measure, of your 1 hour maximum on the bike, for those that don't know, functional threshold power, but it doesn't necessarily apply to almost any real world events. And so my question to anyone that's trying to improve it specifically is why. Obviously, training, you will inadvertently improve your FTP, but for anyone who's trying to specifically focus on that, unless you're aiming for a specific number, fair enough. But again, my question to that is why, other than to be able to say, this is my FTP, or I hit this many watts per kilo?
Ego. It's quite, in my case anyway.
All right, well, there's the answer.
It's quite simply ego. I want to hit it because
it's nice.
It's nice.
It makes me feel good.
Yes.
All warm and fuzzy.
And it is,
and very warm and fuzzy, actually, because of the blood flow and the lactate.
And it is the cycling, it's the cycling equivalent of your 5K time, really. It's like something that everyone understands. As soon as you get into running, probably one of the first things that you learn as a metric is a 5K time or a park run. What time? Oh my God, these people can do a 16-minute park run. I'm taking 35 minutes to do it. And then the equivalent of when you get into cycling, you start learning what power is, and oh my God, Tadej Pogacar's FTP is 450 watts or whatever it is, versus, oh my God, I can't even push that for 10 seconds once you get access to a bike with power on it, and you start to learn kind of how impressive that is. But yeah, I don't think it's something that you should be, certainly not optimizing your training to perform for 1 hour on a bike. It's not, as I said, not applicable to.
So for those listening, where do we think it has a place? Because we use it as a training metric, as a way of giving parameters to train within. So with all of our training programming, we will incorporate it as part of a baseline testing period, but that is, as with all training testing, a way of establishing where an individual is currently versus where they want to get to, and then you apply training zones so that they can move in that direction. But a lot of those training zones then allow the athlete to spend time in zones that don't necessarily directly contribute to developing 1 hour max power as the optimal output. So most people listening will be recreational road bike riders or budding triathletes, 70.3 or Ironman distance athletes. So how can we quantify this so that beyond a testing metric, those listening can understand the utility of FTP?
Well, that's essentially all it is, in my opinion, is a testing metric. And it's, you can start, measure your FTP through probably a ramp test for most people. I think doing an FTP test, which would either be a 1 hour max effort, which is horrendous. I have done one, wouldn't advise, or a 20-minute max effort, and then multiply it by 0.95 to get your estimated 1 hour max.
Well, 1 hour test is way worse.
Oh, it's a million.
Why did you decide to do that? Quick interjection.
Lockdown.
Oh, fair enough. Okay, fine. No further questions. No further questions.
But a ramp test is a much easier way of actually getting your number established without needing to learn how to execute the test, if that makes sense.
Correct.
So
yeah, agreed.
For an athlete to actually get the most out of themselves for an hour, for especially a beginner, is almost impossible. For a 20-minute test, it's very hard to execute until you've done a couple of them. Ramp test, basically you just try and increase the power every minute until you can't go any further. Almost everyone can do that. It's very simple, and you will get a number that will then be able to set your training zones for the next block of training, and you can then do a ramp test again in anything from 4 to 12 weeks. Your number will have improved, but it's not that we've optimized your training to improve that number, if that makes sense. You can then reset your zones.
So it's almost like if you were trying to improve your body composition while still trying to maintain as much strength as possible, whereby scale weight is a metric that can give you some context around, are things moving in the right direction, but you are not optimizing for scale weight necessarily. You're optimizing for a reduction in body fat whilst maintaining as much muscle as possible.
And you get that a lot in, like, girls will typically attach themselves to a scale weight. I've noticed, like, especially from my PT days, girls will say, oh, I want to get back to 65 kilos. And when you dig down on that, they will say it's because the last time they felt good about themselves in the mirror is when they saw that number on the scale. But
that wasn't factoring in resistance training and all the things that go into it.
And the muscle that you gain versus the the body composition changes that you're going to make. It's a good analogy, I think, of like fixating on, you don't want to fixate on the number when you're kind of ignoring, it's like, oh, my FTP hasn't increased in this 12-week block. It's like, yeah, but your long ride has increased from 90 minutes to 4 hours. And you felt actually better after the 4-hour ride than you did at that 90-minute ride that we did in week 1. So it's like, yeah, if someone comes to me and they're training for any distance triathlon, especially an Ironman, it's like we might actually, once we hit that initial kind of beginner gains, we might not actually see much of an improvement on your FTP in a 12-week block because we're not optimizing for that. We're optimizing for increasing your endurance from 2-hour long ride to 6+ hour long ride, and most likely your FTP will increase, but sometimes it might not. But you need to look at the broader picture of, oh well, I'm actually able to tolerate 10 hours or 6 hours a week on the bike and not be absolutely floored from it.
Yeah. So I guess the next question is what are the qualities that we are trying to develop in an athlete that's optimizing for long distance bike riding or triathlon? Because whilst as a byproduct of training those qualities, their FTP will likely improve, those are not the things that we're actually optimizing for. So Keiran, I guess to put it into your context for the time being, what are the qualities that you are trying to develop in your training to become a better bike rider?
So for me at the moment, particularly racing, one of the biggest things, I was saying this to my own cycling coach only a couple of weeks ago actually, was FTP has gone up since I've started working with him quite considerably, but the biggest benefit to me has been the durability that I feel at the end of previously, particularly if I pushed it a little hard, I'd come to the end of a 3-hour ride, feel pretty battered, or 3.5, particularly if I was pushing decent watts. Now, after having put in such a sustained block of long rides, my aerobic fitness feels so much better, my durability is there, that a 3-4 hour ride is very, very routine. And that is so powerful, particularly in triathlon, where typically you're cycling much longer than a recreational cyclist. Most people, if you're in the bike racing side of things, you're probably not, unless you're in the very niche long distance time trial world, you're probably not putting in 6-hour races like you would in an Ironman, where you are doing very long bikes. So that aerobic fitness and durability side is huge. In the crit racing world or anything like that, that top end power is really important for sprinting or accelerating out of corners. And then the aspect that is almost impossible to train by optimizing for FTP on indoor intervals or anything like that is bike handling. So for me, as a relatively newer cyclist and racer, or relatively newer racer, it's by far my biggest deficit. It's not FTP, it's not power. Particularly being my body weight, I'm probably in a Cat 4 probably going to be one of the most powerful guys there. It's just a fact. But my bike handling won't allow me to express that. And it's where you have to look at what is actually the thing limiting my performance. It's not my FTP at the level I'm at. Sure, I don't have the FTP I would need to be a Cat 1 racer, obviously. But right now, if I want to go up to Cat 3, it's not my FTP that's holding me back. It's my bike handling. It's my ability to read a race. It's all these other things that go into it.
I was going to say, like actually racecraft, which is very specific to what you're doing.
Yeah.
Probably doesn't apply to, because if we're talking about like doing a triathlon, for example, you're not. It's an individual time trial. It isn't a race. But
but you could your FTP could effectively drop by a significant amount as those qualities you've just described increase, and you would become a better, more effective.
Like if this was a video game and you're adjusting the qualities on like
agility down 6,
you could spend a couple less points on FTP. Spend those points on if you're trying to make a more well-rounded athlete.
Yeah.
For sure. But I guess the way that you could apply that to triathlon, for example, is learning to ride the course. I think is like a very under discussed and underutilized skill. So it's like you're coming to a slight rise in the road. Like I'm going to put in a little bit more effort here to maintain my average speed, so that when I come over the top of this roller, I'm then going to be able to come off the pedals and cruise, and like things like that over the course of 180k make quite a big difference. Versus if you just imagine someone who is just like, I'm just going to ride at 220 watts the whole time. It's like that's actually not the most efficient way to do it. It's like learning. That's just why, for example, like Cam Worth in the pro triathlon field does really well, because he is a cyclist at heart, and so he's very, very, very good at riding the course and getting the absolute maximum out of himself. So it's kind of like the application of that, like what you're saying, learning to race. The equivalent for triathlon is learning to ride the course, I think.
But what you're training for with triathlon for the most part, 73 is more of a demand aerobically in terms of actual fitness. You can blow up in a 70.3. It's quite easy to blow up in a 70.3. But in a full distance, essentially, you are just trying to become as efficient as possible in every single way.
Unless you're the pro, the pro guys are like racing it on the limit. But for most amateur athletes, it's
a game of efficiency, which is a combination of power in the right zone, sustained without accumulating too much fatigue, it on the bike and then carried over into the run. Fueling, aerodynamics, as you said, riding the course.
I think a big one there as well.
All these
cadence.
things. Yeah,
I think a lot of people are not riding at an optimal cadence for themselves, and therefore making it harder than it needs to be. And the other note that I wrote here, regards to how to improve your FTP, is trying to establish what is the limiting factor on your current FTP. Is it aerobic or is it muscular? And then working on that weakness to try and balance that out. Some people, it might be fairly balanced, but for other people, especially hybrid athletes coming from potentially a strength background, you're probably not limited. Well, muscular endurance, you're going to be limited, but it's probably the aerobic side that's limiting you getting a better result on that FTP test. And so you're trying to balance that out first of all before you try and improve it. It's like if you do an FTP test, 200 watts, but what was the limiting factor? It was aerobic there. So if you can just increase, you don't even need to get any fitter. You don't need to get any much of a higher FTP. You can just improve your aerobic fitness and then build it from there. If that makes sense.
I mean, we've had a lot of athletes work with us, haven't we, Keiran, where they've come from a strength background, they're getting into cycling, and their ability on a ramp test is drastically improved after a relatively short period of time comparative to other athletes, because they essentially learn or condition their body to be able to express the power that they already have dormant. And that is unfortunately not something I've ever really been able to make use of fully. I've never really been able to fully apply my squat power to a bike, but never mind.
Yeah, I guess it is very different in terms of like, it's the muscular endurance.
But top end power, I can now put quite a lot.
Like,
which is interesting. But again, it's knowing that muscle mass capacity is there. It's then how much can you train it and condition it to be able to endure in terms of capillary density, all that sort of stuff as well. So, no, interesting. Okay, cool. So, I feel like we've gone full circle to the start of this, which is, generally speaking, do we think FTP is useful to pay attention to beyond as a testing metric? And if the answer is no, we'll take this conversation in a different direction.
I would say it's not worth really paying attention to, other than a vanity and zone setting metric.
Keiran, Craig just call you vain, but beyond that,
I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. I'm just saying.
Where I see some value in it outside of setting testing parameters is in the case of, for example, my goal, where I simply wanted to be able to quantify I am fitter on the bike without something like a time trial where you're going to have the influence of wind or aerodynamics or something. I simply wanted a number that says at the end of this year, I am fitter on the bike and I'm also stronger, hence my concurrent goal.
Yep.
And it wasn't influenced, because obviously the issue is with running, barring extremely strong winds or crazy elevation or something, your time is pretty much influenced by you. Whereas the speeds that you go at on a bike, because of how the drag factor works, you're exponentially more exposed to winds in terms of your time, your aerodynamics. It all has a much bigger factor. So realistically, I could game it and say I'm much fitter by simply getting more aerodynamic or doing my time trial with a tailwind. So I just wanted a metric that quantified I was fitter. Mm-hmm. Where I do see application, particularly outside of, say, triathlon, is obviously, as we spoke about at the start earlier, it's just time trialing. It is a very different niche to triathlon, much shorter, much harder efforts, and much more applicable to that FTP duration. In the context of triathlon, I don't think it has much bearing, certainly not on the performance of the race distances.
20 milers are sort of in the ballpark, aren't they? Yeah. But I reckon emails, exchanges, circle interactions I've had over the course of Omnia existing, I've probably had 4 or 5 reference points or conversations around that sort of range as a choice of execution, which isn't undermining it in any way, shape, or form, but just for the context of this Omnia performance podcast, is that it has more of a place there than it does the more popularized expressions of cycling at the moment, I'd say. But very good points.
The vast majority of people want to cycle longer than 20 miles or.
The thought of a 20-mile time trial makes me feel sick. Yeah. Like right now, and I'm not even on the bike doing it. That's more your bag, isn't it, Craig? Really?
I feel like I'd quite enjoy something like that. Yeah.
Oh, psychopath. I see. Okay. So essentially, this conversation has now then pivoted to how does one get better on the bike? And I think the big thing that is very difficult to do, but is a very harsh reality is time in the saddle.
Yeah, that's what I've got on the points that I wrote before was just consistency, just time on the bike. You will just, and I've also written that general fitness will improve your FTP.
So the highest my FTP has ever been was just before the start of my tenacity prep, and I had not done any intensity on the bike other than a couple of climbs and surges in 4 months. So my FTP got to 332, and it started at, I think it was 289, and that was over like a 6-7 month period. That's the highest it's been.
Yeah.
And that was from zone 1, zone 2 volume, around 12 hours a week for the most part. Yeah. Not exciting volume, not exciting training, and ironically, not big hard efforts on the turbo that feel like it's the thing. It almost different to running. Well, depends on your views, because there are some people that are just volume running, one speed workout, one speed session every month. You'll be fine. But I think you can get away with a lot less volume running if you do really high quality work to a point. Less so in cycling, where I think time in the saddle, because the the equivalent of a 1 hour easy run in terms of energy utility relative to the sport, I'd say is probably equivalent to 3 hours on the bike. About that, give or take, which is inconvenient, inaccessible, and part of the challenge, and the reason I flip-flop from love to hate with my bike.
Yeah, it is unfortunate how, if you don't have the time or the love for riding your bike, I guess for those sorts of people, it is unfortunate how much time you do need to spend on your bike to improve it. But if you love cycling, it's very fortunate, because like that's me. I fall into that category. I love cycling.
I love cycling. Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, this is just such an easy way to get gains. Like my prep for Keiran's was very similar. I only did basically easy riding. Mostly I did a couple of sessions, but the vast majority of my work was, zone 2 and below.
What's cool as well is if you did then want to pivot into a better effort 70.3 or a faster Olympic distance, for example, building that aerobic base, you wouldn't need to change much beyond adding 1 or 2 really hard effort sessions in there just to build up. And
I guess like there was a slight difference for me in that I was regaining fitness, and I did have a relatively high power output previously, but to regain it, I was actually very surprised as to how quickly my numbers came back from doing very unstructured training, and all of a sudden I was kind of pushing 250 watts for an Ironman effort, which was where I'd got myself to almost before doing very structured training. And
have you got to a 400 FTP before?
Nah, 380 unfortunately. 382 or 383.
What's yours peaked at, out of interest?
About 330.
Mine was a ramp test.
2 watts. That's an aero brake cover away, bro.
Mine was on a ramp test as well, which I would argue, I think, completely flipping the point that we made earlier. To get an actual accurate FTP, a ramp test is the least accurate. However, it is the best metric to use for beginners. But for example, like pro cyclists are not doing a ramp test to estimate their FTP. They will be doing.
For example, so I did my first ever outdoor in aero FTP test. 6 weeks out from tenacity, just to see where I was in that position, to re-establish my zones basically, and just keep those zones the whole way through with the rest of my prep. And I got stuck behind a bus. So just again, with all the intention in the world, I had an external variable kind of undermine my result a little bit. So I think I came out on 2:86 with a 30-second stop, which was obviously far from ideal in that, but it was very good to have that data, because then it meant that I was much more aware of what the power numbers in front of me outdoors meant. Because I don't know about you guys, but my relationship with power on the turbo versus outdoors is very, very different.
Yes.
Which can be quite jarring in terms of your expectations as to how something should feel. So I think it's quite good to have data points outdoors, indoors.
Yeah, it's very important to learn. And I forgot what I was going to say there.
Well, what you mentioned about the ramp. So what I read an article from the guy that developed it. One of the key points was it wasn't actually originally developed to measure FTP. It's developed as a test of maximal aerobic power, which is what you're holding in that final minutes of the final of the ramp. And what they found was that people's FTP was very, very tightly correlated with 72 to 77% of your map. And what happened was training, if you went on Zwift and it said, oh, your FTP is, and it gave you a 5% range, you'd be a bit annoyed. You're like, no, I want to know what my FTP is. You want a concrete number, and that's how these apps work. Yeah. If you did your Zwift FTP test and it said, oh, it's somewhere between 280 and 300, you want a concrete number. So they chose 75%, and that's where the discrepancy comes in at. So what I always do is, particularly with my heavier or less aerobically developed athletes. So just take 72%
to go to the bottom,
or 70. Just go right to the bottom.
I didn't know the history of that.
So it wasn't developed for FTP. It was just association that actually was. It's very tightly linked.
That definitely applies. So like when I got, I think it was 382 on a ramp test, just being honest, thinking back to then, like, could I hold 382 watts for an hour? Like, no way. Even the thought of that at the time.
You just got better at ramp tests.
Yeah, I just got good at ramp test, and I just have like quite a high like output, and so I was suited to getting a high number on a ramp test, especially as a heavier cyclist. But could I apply that to, again, not that it matters, but could I have done that for an hour? Like, no way.
I'm willing to do a 20-minute test outdoors. I'm unwilling to do a 20-minute test indoors. I mean, obviously, if you really told me I had to, then I'd do it. But that's kind of my worldview on that.
It is pretty grim. And, as we've talked about, is it beneficial to kind of look at this number other than a zone setting?
It's a recalibration point, I think, is that's how we use it in our programming generally.
Yeah.
And it helps people understand zones and give them that same sort of clarity that, given the pipeline of running to cyclists at the moment, it lets them frame it in a way that they're familiar with the sort of 5-zone system that we use for running as well, which is cool. So I think it's a valuable testing metric and a good thing to have front of mind. But if you do 12 weeks of training and your FTP doesn't jump up by a percentage that you read on Reddit, it might. But then you can look at how efficient you're moving, or your heart rate, or your aero, or all these position changes and things like that can have an impact on your performance. Again, I bring it back to the scale weight analogy. Look at the wider context and the bigger picture around the numbers and the data, and from there you can actually measure success, or not failure, but where you can adjust to move things forwards. So, I mean, beyond getting nitty gritty of zone systems and basic cycling improvement, is there anything else we need to add?
I think a final point that I'd add, and it kind of comes from your question of you framed it as how do you get better on the bike. That to me is an important way to frame it, because particularly if you come from a running background, fitness is fitness. If you build it on a treadmill, yes, minus sort of like your ability to tolerate strides or anything like that. But fitness is by far and away the biggest impact on your 5K time or a 10K time or whatever. But that's not so always the case with cycling. There are so many other elements that go into it, and this is where time in the saddle comes in, particularly outdoors. And I'm such a big proponent of this. I know that in many places it's not safe to ride outdoors, or perhaps you feel more comfortable on the turbo, but nothing will do more for your ability to ride a bike than riding outdoors as much and as often as you can.
I've seen a fair few Americans recently do full Ironman preps indoors because they just say, well, I'm not going to get hit by a car.
Exactly. Like, you know,
I completely understand the logic behind that. It's very unfortunate that is the case. But I just remember reading that thinking my first thought was, wow, it's going to be such a rude awakening coming out of T1 in the aero position, having done a whole block indoors.
Yeah, it's almost like a completely different sport, like riding indoors versus riding outdoors. Yeah. Obviously, there's crossover and there's benefit to doing indoor sessions. For example, if you're doing a structured session, to hit your numbers, to not get a bus puller in front of you and stuff like that, I think it's beneficial to have the option. But if you never ride outside and you're not learning the skill of riding your bike, it's kind of what you're saying. Like, huge. Like running is obviously a skill as well, but fitness is the largest determining factor. But if you're not learning how to push yourself through the air effectively with your legs, it's just, you're not learning that on the turbo.
You're not learning how to hold the position. You're not learning bike handling.
Well, you'll hold the position, but it's very undynamic because you're fixed in that position. Whereas on the road, there's wind.
Flip side though, I think spending time on a turbo is invaluable to determine position efficiencies because there's nowhere to hide. Whereas on the road, you can, because you're changing direction, you're standing up, you're moving side to side. You might not feel a bit of a strain or a pull in your lower back. You might not get as uncomfortable as you might in the turbo. I've gone through a period where on my road bike I felt completely comfortable outdoors but couldn't sit on it for more than an hour indoors. Changed the stem height, brought my seat position a little bit further forwards, I think it was, and that made a massive difference. But it just goes to show that whilst I was comfortable outdoors, there were a couple of things in the background that could have been a little bit better. So it's a combination of both. It's
almost like you can fast track learning if you've got an issue with your position by riding indoors, because it's going to come around a lot quicker.
Yeah,
like you're going to get, if you're going to get uncomfortable on an outdoor ride, it might not come until hour 4, 5, or 6, potentially, but that would come on hour 2 on a trainer, if not before, because you are just in that static position. There's zero, if we're talking about being on a basic turbo trainer, there's zero movement side to side. You're literally locked into that plane, and so if you do have any issues that are going to arise, they're going to come around a lot quicker. So yeah, I think there's benefit to both. If I could only choose one to prep for an Ironman, I'd definitely choose riding outdoors.
100%.
I think like
100%.
going, I mean, you see it all the time, especially in America, these kind of Zwift warriors. And then it's actually dangerous as well.
It's a safety thing though as well, isn't it? Yeah.
Like, because fair enough, they're on closed roads, but there's other cyclists around, and if you're not used to little gusts of wind, how that impacts you. And a lot of them will be riding way too stiff on the bike and not allowing the bike to move underneath them, etc. It's just, I think benefits having both, but if you could only choose one, I would pick riding outdoors.
One thing I will add as well, a lot of conversations with athletes recently on weather's nice, can I go out for a ride with my mates midweek rather than do my turbo session? And I am, because of the time in the saddle, unless obviously someone's looking for a sub-5 Ironman bike split or doing the Grand Fondo World Championships or something like we've had people do in the past. I genuinely believe that 90 minutes out in the saddle with your mates, with a bit of undulation, the odd opportunity where you surge and drop your pedals, or
sprint for road sign,
sit behind a bus, learn to draft is more valuable than a structured session in many, many ways. And just something I want to address because it's a conversation I've had a lot recently.
I think there's obviously a limit to that. You can't just be doing that all the time. It's the same with, if someone's got a long weekend ride and, oh, my mates are doing this, or I'm doing this loop, it's half an hour longer, half an hour shorter, or it's more hilly, or whatever. It's like, it's fine. Just time in the saddle is above all else. Like, there's just the consistency of being on the bike. Obviously, there is nuance to exactly what you're doing, but realistically, if you just get out on your bike and you're enjoying it, it's going to make such a bigger difference than, I pushed 10 watts too high or 10 watts too low, or rode for 10 minutes too long, or whatever.
All right. Fantastic. Enjoyed that. Excellent. Anything else to add? Anything we've missed? Gents?
I think we've covered that nicely.
That's it. Thank you.
All right. Happy riding. Us and all.